today it is my privilege to introduce our moderator tonight, Susan Liu. She is a senior fellow at Harvard University, and she is a co-author of Running Out of Water. This is a great case study, has a lot of case studies and solution book for all of you would definitely love reading about. So please get this. If you want to look at it, I'll leave it here. And she has such passion for water. Before she was a fellow at Harvard, she also led San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. And I had to ask her why she got so interested in water. And she said, growing up in San Francisco, you know, earthquake, you always had to think about earthquake. And she always thought it's not earthquake that would kill people, it's fire, because we're not going to have enough water. So that was her initial start of interest, how she got interested in water. And of course, water, she develops a lot of questions. So I'm really looking forward to all the questions that she will ask and all the discussion that she'll be leading. So I'm very honored to introduce you to Susan.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I will start off with a little joke here because being a water person, I have not a great reaction to bottled water. So I'm going to start off with a George Carlin joke, the late George Carlin, and he used to say, "What is Evian spelled backwards?" And here we go. We have this bottled water. So I think I'm touching this computer. Am I hitting this laptop here? Anyway, so if I keep hitting these things, sorry about that. It's great to be here. It's great to moderate this evening's event. I do see some familiar faces here, and actually some of them are also friendly faces, so that's always a plus. And I want to take a few minutes to set the table for tonight's discussion and talk a little bit about our water situation. Yes, we do have a water crisis in the U.S. and throughout the globe. And it goes beyond the calamity that we're experiencing here in California. We are truly on a collision course between a very finite supply. Remember, we've had the same amount of water on our Earth since the beginning of time. So we have a very finite supply, but now we have 6.7 billion people on our planet, and we're projected to be at about 8 billion within 15 years. With our current population, we already have water stress in over 33 states in the U.S. As an added complication, there's climate change. We can already see what the impact is in California. California, a significant source of our food in the U.S., is experiencing the effects of climate change. As someone who ran a large utility for several years, we saw the impacts, we saw the hydrological impacts of climate change. Decreasing snowpack. And for all of us, we know that with decreasing snowpack, increased precipitation, it means that natural storage, remember, in California, 60% of our water is stored in the snow. And then over the course of the months, that storage trickles that water down to us. So with climate change, that storage is being reduced. Therefore, we see the droughts like we just came out of. Water is not the new oil. There's a big difference between water and oil. There are many substitutes for oil. I'm sure you've discussed many of them here at the VLAB. Solar, different types of solar, biofuels, wind, other things as substitutes for energy and oil. The big difference why water is not like oil is that there is no substitute for water. Yet water is essential for every part of our lives, from the food we eat, all our products, to basic hygiene. And you may ask yourself, how much water do we use? Well, if you've looked at what, if your city takes, say, Palo Alto or San Francisco, San Francisco's been very good at conserving, but say you take most average urban areas. People use 80 to 100 gallons a day for their household use. But that's really only a drop in the bucket, because our actual water footprint in the US is 1,800 gallons a day. 1,800 gallons a day per person. And that's primarily, it's for all our goods, and primarily for the food we eat. So how do we get to those numbers? 8 ounces of beef, 630 gallons. Milk, glass of milk, 53 gallons. The good news is beer is less. But when it comes to steak, I admit I'm guilty, but I think about it more. You're saying, well, how do we get to 630 gallons with 8 ounces of steak? Cows are not that efficient. They have to eat a lot. And that feed takes a lot of water, whether it's grass or grain, it takes a lot of water. The water footprint in the US is double that of the rest of the undeveloped world, or the developing world. It's about 1.5 times the rest of the developed world. But as affluence grows, the water footprint grows. For example, in China, as affluence has grown, and China is now importing beef, their water footprint has grown. And our water crisis is not just about quantity, it's about quality. It's just not how much we use up. It's what we do with the water after we've used it. And remember, for every drop of water we use, we have to dispose of it. And how we dispose of that water will have a direct impact on our future water supply or on our habitat. You may be, or maybe you do know this, but with the exception of San Francisco, or the Hetch-Hetchy system, which includes this campus, 2.5 million people in the Hetch-Hetchy system, with the exception of San Francisco system, Boston system, and New York system, if you're drinking water, it's water that somebody else has used before. Just think about it. If you're in LA, you're getting water from the Delta, you're getting water from Colorado River. Trust me, Colorado River, people have used that a lot before it got to you. The Delta, I don't even want to talk about it. But how you treat that water when you dispose of it. When I want to talk about water, people say, oh, I don't want to talk about wastewater. I'm going, oh, okay. But how you dispose of that, how you treat that water before you dispose of it, or how you reuse it, will have a direct impact on your future water supply and on your habitat. But whether in the US or in the rest of the world, we can and should do better. I did get a small plug for my book here, and I'm not here to plug my book, but we do, in my co-author and I, Peter Rogers, Harvard professor, and I, the two of us did put together a book of case studies, of solutions that can and should be replicated. So there are solutions. And we're about to get to some great solutions here with our panelists. They can give us further ideas, innovations on how to ramp up and how to avert that water crisis. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here to introduce some of these people that can bring those innovations to us, that can bring that well, I would say avert the crisis, but it's more, I guess just at this point, I see water different than a lot of people. At this point, those innovations are almost like Hail Mary passes. We need something, and we need something not outside the box, I hate that expression, but almost outside the building. And I think our panelists can explain some of those solutions to you. Each of them brings a different piece of the puzzle, which is what makes these panelists also very interesting. I'm going to bring up each of them, and David Stanton of APT Water is going to start out. David and Aaron Mandel of Oasis. Aaron and David look more at the urban and industrial space. Chris Berkner, who will also be bringing up in a few minutes, looks more at the agricultural space. And Lee Ng, who's hiding behind the podium there, she's with Siemens, a technology scout. Each one of them bring a different expertise, a different solution. And I'll start off by bringing up David Stanton of APT Water, and he's going to kick it off and give us some of the great innovation he has. Thank you.
Just give me 1 second. I'm going to use a few PowerPoint slides to aid. Okay, I'm going to move the microphone up as well. Something I always have to do after a Japanese introduction. Sorry. All right, my name's David Stanton, and I'm going to try and make it fun. I consider myself somewhat of a born-again entrepreneur. I've been in the water industry now for 20 years. I came into the industry in 1990 with a group of guys that we just decided we were going to put together a little company. We got some venture capital funding. We did some innovative things, like importing media from China, which doesn't sound like a big deal today, but you know, back then it was actually kind of a big deal. And we built up a company and we sold it to Waste Management. In fact, that company was funded by Austin Ventures, was our venture backer at the time. And I remember when we first met with them, they were one of the big VC firms. They had this huge $30 million fund that we were going to get a couple $1 million out of. And I got to say, the world has changed a lot since then. I happen to be an electrical engineer. And when I got out of school in the 80s, my focus in electrical engineering was digital signal processing. And I'm sure my degree is much more suited for some of the other conferences that are held here. But when I got out in the 80s, the only thing I could do was design the nose cones of missiles and helicopter helmets that tracked and you could blink and fire all the guns and stuff like that. And I just decided I wanted to do something else with my career. And so I got into the water field, and I've only looked back once. And that was in the late 1990s. I got severe industry envy. All my double-E buddies from college were starting up .com companies, and everything was booming and going crazy. And so I looked over at them for a while, and I studied some business plans and seriously considered changing fields. And I thought, well, you know, the water industry is really underserviced. There's a total dearth of management and talent. It's completely lacking technology. Most of what came into this industry came in 1972 when they passed the first Clean Water Act and the EPA was created. And a whole bunch of really smart engineers got into the industry. Those guys are like 120 years old right now. And you would be amazed at how much we still rely on them in this industry and how much of the technology that is being installed today was designed by them in 1974. You know, so there's just a tremendous opportunity for innovation. And I got to tell you, I can't tell you the irony I felt back last fall when Kleiner Perkins called me and asked me to come help them with their startup in the water sector. Okay, so here I got the tech envy in the 90s, decided to stick to my guns, stay in water. And then, 10, 12, 15 years later, Kleiner Perkins, kind of the king of digital innovation, was now looking at our space as somewhere where a lot of innovation was needed. So I'm here to kind of tell you the story. I'm not going to go through all the history. Most of what I know about this industry is what not to do. I flew commercial here. If I'd known what to do 20 years ago, I probably would have gotten here some other way, okay? But there is plenty of innovation and plenty of opportunity. And so the theme here is to talk about is, you know, the dry spell over? Can we really innovate? Can we really build innovative business plans? Can we really do something in this sector? And we've got to make money too, you know, which is an important thing. So I've got kind of a hodgepodge of slides. I sort of assembled them after the panel here. We had a good little call on Friday just kicking around ideas, and I just pieced together 3 or 4 or 5 slides that I thought would help with the type of themes that we kind of hit on for this audience. And so I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. The technology company that I have now is called APT Water. And we have one big theme, and Susan hit on it pretty hard. We want to reuse and really recover water, remediate water. We want to bring water back to life is kind of our theme. And we want to do this in a way that doesn't create new problems. So our moniker is clean water, no waste. You know, and you'd be amazed at how much technology in our industry is really waste transfer technology. It moves a problem from one spot to another, but never really deals with it. It's really the just getting into somebody else's backyard approach to solving problems. So we're taking an approach that we really want to solve problem. We're focused on reuse. I'm not going to go through a lot of data on reuse. Susan had a great intro for it. But one thing I do want to point out in our view on reuse water is there is a tremendous amount of energy stored in water. And this is something most people don't think about. But in California, 20% of all of the electricity is used to pump water. 30% of all the natural gas consumed in California is somehow related to either movement of water, treatment of water, or dealing with water, okay? All of that energy goes into water to deliver it to your tap, basically, or to a farm or something like that. And as Susan was saying, most of it just gets flushed down the toilet and down into the ocean, okay? I would be generous to say that we reuse 5% of the water in California after the toilet's flushed, okay? Generous, okay? Think of all the energy stored in that water. So when I talk about reuse, I look at a wastewater plant sitting in the middle of Los Angeles, discharging all of its water out to the ocean, and I don't see water going out to the ocean. I see, you know, 20% of our energy in California and 30% of our natural gas. These things are just going away. And that water is exactly where we need it. That water is right where all the people are. We have to put so little energy in that water to get it back into the supply because it's in the right place, and most of that power is used to get it there. And here we are, we're just throwing it away. So this is an enormous opportunity, and there's plenty of room for groundbreaking ideas. So one of our ideas, we have a group of patents and technology and IP around advanced oxidation. This is not necessarily new science. The guys that invented this were a bunch of Dow chemists. They did it in the late 90s, and they were going after really hard to treat water. Nasty stuff from military bases and industrial complexes, because this was an elephant gun. This was going to really treat all sorts of things. So we've got a good, really, you know, base of installations. We know this technology works. We know it's what it does, but it's kind of exotic. You know, it's only used in strange applications. And so what we have done is we've taken this technology, for lack of a better word, we've simplified it, dumbed it down a little bit, made it more acceptable to the broader wastewater and water reuse markets. And what this product does is it is excellent at treating trace organic compounds. And so it treats for taste, color, odor, you know, basic things you want from your water. Okay, it's the final step in a treatment process. But the one thing it does that almost nothing else does is it takes all of the pharmaceutical byproducts out of the water. Okay, and it destroys them in the process. There's no waste byproduct stream. And pharmaceutical byproducts get into our water supply because, as Susan was mentioning, most of that water that was rinsed through you into the Colorado River picked up birth control, it picked up psychedelic drugs, it picked up anything that was consumed. I'm not saying by you guys, but by somebody in the population. And it is in our water supply, and it is concentrating in the ecology. It's concentrating. A lot, you know, nobody understands that a river also feeds aquifers. Okay, wherever you have an aquifer near a river, that aquifer is fed by the river. Okay, it goes into the aquifers and it accumulates. It goes into the ecology and the fish and the species and does odd things like changes their sexual orientation, things like that. I don't know how it works exactly, but anyway. So we were talking earlier about what, you know, one driver that is driving our business model. And I have to say, it's these endocrine disrupting compounds are what I would say half our phone calls come because communities, industries, people are very concerned about these particular contaminants, and we have a wonderful technology for it. We have another technology that we are focusing on, some very exotic or ubiquitous contaminants. One is nitrates. Nitrate is a byproduct of years of fertilization and farming. Anywhere you have a lot of agriculture, nitrates are from fertilizers and other concentrated farming techniques. They accumulate in the water supply. They percolate their way down to the groundwater table. So we have a technology that's innovated for that. This technology is cool. It's a biofilm that we grow on a hydrogen cell. The cell is fed with hydrogen. The bugs grab the hydrogen. They grab the material in the water. They digest it. And basically, every now and then, we've got to clean out some dead cell bodies from the water just with natural filtration. These bacterial cells are in the water naturally. We don't have to add them. We just have to nurture them. It's a wonderful idea. And the nicest thing about it is we need CO2 and hydrogen to run this process, which are the main components of natural gas. So our vision for this technology is that we will plug natural gas into the plant. That will be the primary consumable, and that will be all we use to treat the water for these contaminants. And natural gas occurs everywhere in our country, and it's a very good resource to utilize. So those are a couple of our technologies. I want to quickly walk through the evolution of our business, because I think tonight isn't so much about just the game-changing technologies, because we could have put 50 people on this panel, because there are a lot of small companies doing innovative stuff. But it's how do you evolve your business plan? How do you go forward in this business? And so at APT, many of our patents date back 13 years. I mean, they started about 13 years ago, and we have patents up to about a year or two ago. So these things have been in the development cycle for a while. In 2009, we got some new ownership with Kleiner Perkins and a company called XPV. Kleiner has a large fund focused on clean tech. We are a water platform for them. XPV is a water-specific fund up in Toronto that just looks at water companies. They're wonderful partners. And we put together a plan that we think sort of ends this dry spell and has some ability for us to grow. And what I want to do is quickly walk through the major pieces of the plan. And these are the things I think and the slides have a lot of information on them. I'm sorry, I don't want to make them too big of a distraction, but these are the things that I think all plans have to consider in some fashion. The first is water has sort of got three major components: municipal, industrial, and remediation. Some of our core technologies started remediating water. Now we see ourselves moving into municipal and industrial water treatment. Where we see the best opportunities is on the boundaries, where you have a city trying to remediate all its nitrate wells. They've shut down 20 wells for nitrates, and they're just idle assets. We come in with a technology that brings those assets back to life, gets that water out of the ground and into the potable supply. That's a remediation of the groundwater for municipal use. An industrial that wants to grow in California, they got to go find water. And the best source is that municipal water plant, or wastewater plant, excuse me. So they have to somehow mine the water out of that wastewater plant, get it into their industrial process, and that becomes their principal source of water. Places like New Mexico, you've got Intel's got a very large facility there, and they're very engaged with the community on water, on what happens to the wastewater, the reuse of water, the recharge of the aquifer. They are right there with the local community dealing with this issue in a big way, and it's part of their sustainability plan. And of course, remediation is just us living near water means we are going to make it dirty, and we will always have to remediate it. So we sort of view these all as sort of key themes. But one thing that I will highlight down here on the bottom is we have a view that scale is going to come from overseas. Right now in the next 10 years, we think there's going to be a lot of technology deployed in North America. But for every one high-tech plant built in the US, we think there's going to be 10 or 20 built in Asia, in China, in India, in these places. They are leapfrogging. They're willing to adopt quickly. They want modern technology. They want low cost too. But they are also going to be a driver for us. So we actually think a lot of scale is going to come from those markets. This slide I could talk about for 6 hours, but I'm going to give you it's an eye chart. And I just want you to remember one thing. There's only one real source of revenue in the water industry, and that's you paying your water bill. Up there in the top left corner is where our money comes from. Everybody in this room, whether they do it through their homeowners association or directly, pays a water bill. That defines at the core what our industry is. It is the best cash flow stream in the world. This is why our government does not want to give up their water businesses, okay? It is such good cash flow. Everybody pays their bill. They all need it. As their families grow, their water consumptions grow. As the demographics change, we have a demographic crisis that Susan was talking about. This is where the cash comes from. Now, what happens after that gets really confusing, okay? A lot of the negative press about venture funding in the water industry comes because technology attaches itself to the capital cycles, okay? And what the cities and industries do with that wonderful water bill you pay is they break it up into consumables, labor, repair and maintenance, and then debt service, okay? That's all that bill pays. So the actual client for our business that's going to buy stuff really only knows those categories. So every time they want to invest capital, they hire an advocate. Usually it's an engineer or a financial advocate that actually puts together a capital program, raises bond proceeds, goes out for auction on the whole process to a general contractor. The general contractor breaks it up into subcontracts. It gets parsed out. Everybody bids at every level. Next thing you know, you've got this massive auctioning process that takes place. And so where most technologies find themselves is in spot A and B. And to be honest with you, spot B is the highest margin spot in the industry. If you have intellectual property around parts and components going into our industry, you're going to get the highest margins. If you have solution technologies like I'm selling, you're usually at spot A, okay? But you're all slave to this capital cycle that these bond programs are on, okay? And it's very hard to predict, very unreliable from a timing point of view, not the type of things financial people like to hear. So we're focused on how do you get up to spot C and D, because you pay your bill every month, right? That means there is cash coming in every single month, no matter what. There is absolutely AAA credit rating at spot C, no matter what you do in our industry, okay? What happens after C is where the credit rating starts to fall apart. So we want to be at spot C, and we also want to be at spot D, which is a lot of government agencies and industries have spent a lot of time in the past trying to own their water supply. And we think that model's pretty much tapped out because water allocation is pretty much over-allocated, so there's no new water for them to go buy and own. So now it's how do they get water, which means somebody's going to provide it for them, and we think there's a real opportunity to sell water by the gallon and purchase water. So pick your spot on the chart and get there. At APT, we've decided, even though we're a technology company, we're going to have a service platform because that service platform is going to run our facilities, and we're going to bill our clients at spot C, okay? We will still participate at spot A, trying to sell our capital, but we want to be able to go to that spot C. If we want to get to spot D and actually own the assets and sell water by the gallon, we need funds. It's infrastructure ownership funds. And so we've actually put together an infrastructure fund to also back our technology. The other advantage this model gives us is that it's very long introduction cycle for new technology in our business. So what this allows us to do is go to our clients and say, you're not going to buy capital through the engineer from us. We are going to put our capital on your site. We're guaranteeing it. Don't worry about it. We're just selling you water by the gallon. And this is an enabling solution to get our advanced technology out to these sites faster than going through the conventional procurement processes. Once you pick your model, like we've set up, you got to pick your financial structure, and I will be done in 2 minutes. So what we've done is we've broken our company into two financial models. One is sort of a typical venture growth type model, which relates around our technology and service platform build out. The other is this infrastructure funding. And we've actually raised 2 buckets of funds from 2 different sources. And as time goes on, we expect to see a lot of divergence. As we prove out our technologies and grow out this infrastructure ownership model, we think we can get capital at a much lower cost than where we're taking all the technology risk over in the venture side. So we've actually created a dual funding structure, and we've already, in our Series B, closed these 2 funding sources. And we sort of have a backup on the infrastructure side that if we can get large enough projects, we can bring money in there sort of on a project-by-project basis with a group of infrastructure investors. Once you got your whole plan figured out, I can't tell you enough how important building the team is. Most of what I know, 80% of what I know is what not to do. 20%, I don't know what to do, but I'm hoping it's right, okay? But the 80% I know, most of it deals with the team and the people. And we've developed a real rigid, process for recruiting and developing and hiring talent. The first thing I ask, we were talking earlier, where'd you get your people? Because getting good people is really the key to this business. And there's lots of them out there. I see a big recycling going on from GE and Siemens and Veolia, no offense, but there's a lot of people that would like to get back into high-growth, small company environments, and it's a great time to recruit talent into these initiatives. And then finally, what's the exit strategy? I mean, I put my little off-ramp here. You can pick New York City, or Pittsburgh happens to be where Siemens is headquartered, and Veolia, and so some of the strategics are there. So I thought this was kind of appropriate. I'm not selling to you, but the idea is you got to have in mind that you've got to have some vision for your off-ramp, and there are some really good ones. You know, private equity is a great option for a stable company with good cash flows, and I think we can create one here. Strategic buyers, particularly if you're a technology niche type company, marry up a gap that one of the big companies has, and that's a great way to grow your plan and have a partner all the way through it. And then, of course, IPO. And I put IPO, then think global. You know, if the scale is all coming from Asia and China, you know, you don't need to be limited to, you know, conventional IPO type routes. I mean, there is access to capital in other currencies and other markets that is very available. And these people are willing to partner with American firms and take them and help enable the growth in these scalable markets. And so it's a very important part of our plan as well. So that is my presentation. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, David. It was a great presentation, and you only offended the Asian community and the gay community, so there, we're glad you stopped. And with that, I'll invite up the other panelists.
I have to think about that one for a minute.
The other panelists.
Oh, the fish. Okay.
Wait a minute, they're hesitating about coming up and sitting with you, David. We're going to now have the other panelists do a brief introduction. Their bios are all in your handout, so you don't need another bio, but we're going to let them take a couple minutes each. Maybe Aaron, we'll start with you and tell us a little bit about your business and how it evolved to where it is now.
Yep.
Aaron Mandel.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm Aaron Mandel. I'm co-founder and CEO of Oasis Water. So Oasis is a venture-backed startup. We actually spun a brand new technology that was originally developed at Yale University. So my background is actually in starting companies. Prior to getting involved in Oasis, I was involved in a couple of alternative energy ventures, one in geothermal, one in clean coal gasification, and one in biofuels. And the theme that kept coming up over and over again is just how much water all these processes consume. And they actually consume a lot more water than conventional power generation or energy technologies. And so what I realize is that in moving to alternative energy, you're actually using water as a much more important resource than it ever has been before. In order to make alternative energy really happen, I had sort of come to the conclusion that we need to find much better ways of using alternative water resources, low-grade water resources, and ways of reducing the cost of water treatment. And so the folks at Yale had actually come to a similar conclusion, and the technology that we're developing, which we call engineered osmosis, is specifically a way to use osmosis, which is a very powerful force for treating water and for desalinating water, but to shift off of consuming electricity to do it. Electricity is a very valuable resource. It's a very expensive energy source to be using to treat and desalinate water. And so this technology is specifically tailored towards using low-quality heat. So we can pretty much eliminate the electricity consumption for desalination and focus only on using low-quality or waste heat or reject heat. And what that means is waste heat is basically all the BTUs that are lost when you burn fuel. When you burn any type of hydrocarbon fuel, up to 50 to 60% of the BTUs are being lost as heat. So anyone that's producing power, all the heavy industries, there's an enormous resource out there of waste heat that's going unutilized. And so our technology specifically focuses on using that waste heat to reuse wastewater. So that's a big area is wastewater reuse, both industrial and municipal, and also desalination. So we can treat brackish salt streams, seawater, all the way up to very high concentrations, like the types of brines that are produced in the oil and gas industry that are upwards of 150,000 TDS. And we do all of that without consuming electricity, but consuming very low quality heat. So our customer base is the heavy industries, pulp and paper, metals, mining, power generation, chemicals, all the industries where you're doing a lot of power generation, you have tremendous amount of heat. This is a great resource for our customers to use to treat water instead of consuming electricity. So our goal is, we're scaling up our process now, and we're going to have our first product out in the field next year, but it's to put a device, a simplified device, in the hands of these customers that have waste heat so that they can reduce their water footprint and really have much better management of their core resources, water and wastewater.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Chris, maybe we'll jump over to you and then come back to Lee. Chris, his product, as you can tell you about, focus on the agricultural arena, and that is such a big, as we know, about 70% of the water in the world is used for agriculture. So, Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. So I have two hats that I wear. I came into this by starting a early stage venture capital firm called One Earth Capital, which is a $20 million fund focused on water, agriculture, and energy. And that was in 2007. In 2008, we made an investment in a company called PureSense, which is a water monitoring company for agriculture. And about a year ago, I actually stepped in as president and CEO. So I went from wearing suits and ties to boots and jeans, and having a very different experience driving around in the Central Valley most of my time. So again, PureSense is a water monitoring company for agriculture. What that means is we put stations out into the field that collect data from sensors like soil moisture sensors or weather sensors that collect data relevant to farmers in their decisions about when to irrigate and how much to irrigate, as well as some auxiliary kind of information like frost alerts and that sort of thing that help growers just know what's going on in the field and make decisions in real time. And the net effect is that we find our growers are saying things like, hey, I cut my water use by 50% 3 weeks after installing PureSense. And that's a really good story. Sometimes it's 30%, sometimes it's 10%. Sometimes it even goes the other way. A grower might actually figure out they're not using enough water. But in general, the water efficiency of our growers is going significantly up. And by using the technology, they can actually identify where the active root zone is in the plant, which changes throughout the season. And by identifying that, they can see where their water is landing in their soil moisture profile. So that's part of how they optimize and increase their water efficiency. They also increase their fertilizer efficiency because they can see where their fertilizer is landing, which reduces runoff and saves them money. And ultimately, we're seeing a lot of crop yield increases, crop quality increases, and reduced disease pressure. We have about 225 growers through 7 states, and in total, they grow on about 600,000 acres.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I think when you say about a 10% improvement, just all of you should keep in mind that 10% of ag is enough for all of urban and industrial water. So it's a big thing. So don't say 10%'s a small item. It's pretty great. And now we're going to go over to Lee Ng, and she is a technology scout for Siemens. And maybe she can tell us a little bit about what they're doing. And then we're gonna focus on Ng for a little bit after she tells us a little bit about her work. Sure.
So my last name is Ng, spelled N-G, and may I buy a vowel? It's a tough one, over the phone. Try to pronounce it over the phone. It's tough. But anyway, so at least I'm just lacking a vowel.
But you don't want an A. You don't want a nag. You don't want.
Well, actually, you know what? I hate. I have something against Microsoft. Every time it goes through my name, the suggested word change is nag.
That's what I
take issue.
That's the word. That's terrible.
So anyway, I'm happy here to share with you my. Kind of my journey and also what I'm trying to do at Siemens. I actually have the best job. I'm a technology scout. So basically I go, my job is I go look for interesting thing, and then I got some money. I'm not going to tell you how much, but there's some amount of money that I have to spend every year to invest in these technology. And there's a lot of flexibility in what we do. Our group is called Siemens Technology to Business. We can basically get, 2 guys, 2 gals in a garage and fund them. We can start a company. I have a project right now where I have a research agreement with a university, option on the IP, and I'm doing some technology development. If all goes well, I'm going to license it. I can take an early stage pre-revenue equity investment. So basically, our goal is to, to put it very simply and bluntly, we recognize that intelligence exists outside of our company. And so we would like to benefit from those intelligence. So our investment really is a way to help external technology prove that it has a business value to Siemens and there is a strategic fit. So that's my job.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lee. We're going to just start off with some questions and get a little conversation going here with our panelists. And Lee, I'm going to keep the focus on you. And I'd like you to explain a comment you made to a few of us just a couple days ago when you said there is not a limit to water innovation, but there is a limit to the water channel. And maybe you could explain that. Start us off.
Okay, so I'm going to be provocative here. So in this was the phone conference that we all had, all the panelists, and we were talking about, why is it so hard to get venture funding out there? What is the issue here? What's the limitation? And I made the comment that I said, I don't think this is an innovation-limited industry. It is a channel-limited industry. And by that, what I meant is that if you look at companies, municipal out there, when they want to purchase equipment, there are basically a handful of companies they would like to buy from. I, of course, hope Siemens is one of them. And then there is the well-known ones that I shall not name. And then actually not to be missed are a few regional ones. I also consider water business to be very much what I call a regional business. Every region have a few of those more established companies. And those are basically your, if you look at it from a technology point of view, your route to the market. And that's why I think it's a channel-limited market because of the fact that you need to go through one of these companies in order to basically have a business. So that was what I meant when I said it's channel-limited.
Before I'm going to let one of your other panelists respond to that, I've been reminded, yellow cards. I'm sure you have a lot of good questions already, so start filling those out, sending those down the aisle. So any one of your colleagues up here on the dais want to respond to that? I mean, David, you made it sound like, there's clear pathway, so.
Well, no, I actually agree. The term we use is that it's a global market, and almost the numbers you see are measuring the global aspect of the market. The need is the same everywhere on Earth, okay, and the demographic problems not too dissimilar, but it is totally a local business. And if you don't have some aspect of that in your plan, then you're missing the boat. And we're going to try everything. I mean, we're going to have local service markets where we can afford to and where we can grow them out. We're going to have channel partners like Siemens and some others in some key regions that we think we'll never reach. And we're going to use a variety of these channels. But yeah, you have to absolutely pick those channels and make them work.
Aaron, you look like you wanted to respond.
Yeah, no,
to that.
I was just going to say, I mean, a real-world example of one of the things that we had to do at Oasis is the technology, for us, in our case, was originally developed for municipal seawater desalination. And so when we went out to raise money from the VCs, and actually I have one of my investors in the room, DFJ, so I got to be careful what I say here. But we initially were focused on seawater desalination, and we realized that if we spent 2 or 3 years developing and improving the technology, we then needed another 5 years just to get the sales cycle complete because it's a very slow adoption curve, very conservative, and pilot testing takes many, many years to demonstrate drinking water capabilities. So we've shifted to focus on industrial solutions, And we've been actually very pleased with the response. I mean, I'll give you an example of one market where I think there's a tremendous appetite for new technologies and companies that are willing to take risk, and that's the produced water space. Right now, we're drilling for a lot of alternative forms of natural gas and oil, and those alternative resources produce water that comes out of the ground at very high salinities, and it needs to be treated. It can't be re-injected. It's very expensive to transport it off-site to centralized facilities. So a lot of independent gas producers, for example, that are doing hydraulic fracturing are looking for new technologies that they can deploy for reusing water on site. And so, you know, for us, that's a great example of a desalination application that is in focus on the industrial side of the business. Another example is some of the largest desalination plants in the world today are getting built specifically, not for drinking water, but specifically for things like mining, for metals. There's a lot of instances where you don't have the water resource to do mining, and they're building desalination capacity just to do that. So I think there's a lot of demand in some of those areas.
Well, thank you, Aaron and David, for giving us the specifics, and I hear what you're saying about it's a focus on local ways of getting your business forward. Lee, you had, when we chatted, and we talked about the fact that there's really a difference in what you do and in that you're representing a corporate investor, and it's very different than a VC. We all know it's very different. How, in your perspective, how is that difference between the corporate investor and the VC play out in the water space?
That's a great question. In fact, I have to admit, at the phone call, I was complaining. So I was complaining about the fact that as a corporate VC, we are much more about what is the technology, what's the strategic fit. Most of the slide set that I get talks about the benefit and all the good things, but doesn't tell me what is it that they are actually doing. So it's like, oh, everybody said we have better, faster, cheaper, or better energy efficiency, but doesn't talk about technology. So this is basically an advice to people out there. There are VC you have to sell to, and don't get too technical. And then there are the corporate people where, after you give it to me, I'm going to give it to somebody who has spent 20 years trying to solve what you just said you're trying to solve. So you have to give enough detail so that, first of all, I'm not going to sign an NDA because I see a lot of things. And secondly, until I decide that there's something unique about what you're doing, I'm not going to take the next step. And so there are so many startups I work with where we go in this circle, you won't tell me anything. And then you expect me to kind of go on with you. And I just don't know how to deal with that. So I think that's really the big difference. The difference is look for the strategic fit. And actually, I'll give you another advice. If you're going to approach basically the best way to get a corporate investor or a corporation joint development on board is to look at their product, see where they are in the industry, and I always go for the second place. Because the second place guy has much more incentive to actually use something disruptive to gain market share, or even the third place. The danger of going with the market leader is that it could be a big stalling game, and the big, will evaluate some more. And so, this again is an advice, I work for a big company. A lot of things takes time. And as a startup, you run out of money if you don't have, if it takes too much time.
Okay, that was a great ad for Avis. Now, seriously, that was a very good answer, Lee. Thank you. Chris wants to jump in there.
I just want to ask a follow-up question. So what's your perspective on taking board seats in your companies?
It's a tough one because, in certain cases, because if you are on the board, you have the judiciary duty to be working for the shareholders. Then as a company, especially if there are specific agenda we're trying to push, then you could get into a issue of conflict of interest. So that's why a lot of time we take observation, so it's case by case, but board seat is not always the best thing for a big company. But it really depends on a lot of things. Yeah. But we are aware of that. We're not going to put ourselves in a position where there's a conflict of interest.
Lee, one other question I want to throw out here that again is putting you again in the hot seat or putting the focus on you. How key is it for innovators in the water space? How key is it for really scaling up to be linked up with a Siemens, a Veolia, or Suez, or similar type companies, large companies?
It's a hard one because if you look at in the past, right, all the big water company today were small company a long time ago and then got bought up by the big company and they did a consolidation play. So, you know, I don't think it would be correct to say that there is no chance at all for small company to become a big real player in the water industry. However, if you look at the financial environment, the IPO situation, that's probably going to be the bigger limit. That's why I think David, you mentioned something about be open to where you take the company to market. Mm-hmm. It might be that the Asian community would value exit higher than here. But basically, the problem with the water that's very different from the traditional VC business is that it's the VC would say capital inefficient, right? That's what you would say. Capital inefficient, sounds bad. Basically, you need a lot of money to get anywhere. When I talked to my division and I said, oh, let's just go do, a field trial, they're like, oh, that's $1 million. So a field trial is $1 million, a real one, not, tiny little thing that you put bench top, stuff that you build, real thing. It's $1 million. So you just need, and then when you talk to, say, a lot of companies, you say, oh, so how much reliability data or field data would you like to see? They're like, at least 6 months, preferably 2 years. You go calculate that. And with the burn rate, it's just expensive. So really, it comes down to how much capital can you get to where you need to be before you can really become, break even and become cash flow positive.
Let me throw out this. How much influence does regulation have on the water business?
Very much.
I mean, for all of you, does that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's the big driver.
It's one of the biggest drivers, definitely.
Right. So that's we're seeing different things now. You mentioned about trace pharmaceuticals in water. There was just recently a study done by USGS. They did a 5-year study. The report came out in June. It's just past June, and they're showing that the trace pharmaceuticals, when the effluent is downstream from a pharmaceutical manufacturing or formulation plant, the concentrations are 100 to 1,000 times more than just from an urban effluent that doesn't have that as one of its customers. Yeah, so that's going to be a
quick comment on that. When I got into this industry in the 90s, it was 100% regulation dependent. I mean, you could not get a city or an industry to actually make a decision unless there was a well-defined regulation around it. But we've already booked an $11 million order on EDC destruction that's an unregulated compound. Okay, we've got probably another 50 million plus of projects that people are talking to us on. Specifically, the only reason we're on the job is EDC destruction. And so these are people that are saying, I'm not going to wait for the regulation because somebody's going to get sued, so they're actually taking steps, and the technology is available, and the way the government's working today, it could be years before a real thorough.
So again, it goes back to that issue. It's not just the quantity of water; the quality of how we dispose of has an impact on so much of the future sources. Chris, I just want to pull you in here for a little bit again, back into agriculture, because so much of our water. My question is, with so much water, for example, in California, where we're seeing the Westlands Water District or other places in the Central Valley, just with the groundwater being depleted, why isn't everybody taking advantage of the type of innovation you have? I mean, why is it just not your product just flying out the door? Or maybe it is.
Well, let's see. So a lot of growers are using some method of measuring their soil moisture. Often it's sort of a once a week reading, like a manual reading or a consulting firm that comes along. We look at that basically as kind of driving down the road in the dark with a strobe light. So part of what we do is, make that information real time. We're just increasing the usefulness of the information dramatically. The other thing is that growers in general are not technologists. I mean, they are in a certain way, but they're not necessarily very oriented towards computers or, they are very oriented towards their BlackBerries. So we're kind of moving more and more towards the smartphone applications. But I think the industry has been slow to uptake the technology because of the technical issues involved. So PureSense is actually pretty much the first company to come along and actually provide a complete solution with service and support and software and basically, a turnkey approach. So until then, there have been, you go to a typical grower and you talk to them about soil moisture monitoring and they take you to the garage and show you 7 systems that they've tried over the last 8 years that are just sitting there not being used because they broke down and they couldn't figure out how to use them.
Thank you. I want to get to the, yes, Lee.
I want to add something about, this is more an advice for startup out there if you're trying to start an analytics company. Do not be fooled by the fact that just because we all complain about all the bad stuff in the water, that very accurate and sensitive, good instrumentation is going to be required. That's actually a very, very hard business because in a regulated environment like, say, water, really, for most companies, it is not very good to actually measure to the nth degree of sensitivity everything that's in your water because you never know when you're going to get sued. So this is really more from be realistic if you're in the analytics company. Figure out what your business model is. Don't just come and say, because we're more accurate and we have higher sensitivity. Think about why would your higher sensitivity help whatever it is that you're trying to measure. So this is just basically an advice out there, regulation related, but really the business is the driver.
Okay, I want to now shift into some of the questions. A lot of you have some great questions. I have a few more that I'm maybe going to try to weave in there, but taking off from what you just said, Lee, what are some examples of software applications for clean water technologies? Or do you see that weaving through your business? Anybody want to go for that? Chris.
So PureSense is primarily a software company. The interesting thing about it, though, is that farmers don't particularly have much interest in software, although they're, like I said, they're becoming more interested in software that's on their iPhone or their BlackBerry or their Droid. So I think in monitoring in general and analytics, that's probably where you're going to see a lot of the software applications, making that data user-friendly, kind of as Lee was pointing out. It's got to be useful. It's got to be easy to use. It's got to be a nice system that actually works in their workflow, whatever it is. So with the growing operation, there's a lot of intricacies to understand in creating an application that actually works for them. And I'm sure in all the municipal applications, you have similar types of situations with companies like Wonderware and various process control software, et cetera.
Okay.
So I want to add that I think the most important thing you want to ask yourself if you are like a system measurement software solution thing is just ask yourself the same question as you would if you were, in the medical or a doctor. It's great to have diagnostic and measurement and mapping of all kinds of things. Ask yourself, are you going to do anything different? It's kind of like, in medicine, they say if you have a diagnostic with no therapeutic outcome, basically, no matter what you have, we only have this one medicine for you. Then we really don't need to measure in the first place because there's only one medicine, and that's what you're going to take an aspirin. So I think there's a lot of software out there that says very good mapping and all kinds of value as in knowledge, but it's not clear that from a, again, using the analogy, therapeutically, what would you do different? So I think the value really has to come from the so-called therapeutic decisions.
Okay, okay. I'm going to ask a broader question now because this comes down to, I should be asking one of the audience questions, but I can't help it. I've got to ask this question, and that is, why aren't more businesses concerned about water and their water footprint? I mean, we've heard about some of the beverage companies, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, starting to be concerned about water supply and their efficiency and the efficiency in their supply chain. But almost every other business, some more than others, but say if you're a Walmart, if you're anyone in the food business, why aren't you more concerned about the lack of efficiency in your supply chain if you think you're going to maintain your business or actually have any growth in the future? Because all these industries, I focus on the food business or the food markets because that has a higher water footprint. But every industry uses water. And even though you see companies starting to have more efficiencies in their actual operations or in their businesses, they're not demanding it of their supply chain. So here you have Chris talking about what he has to offer, but the businesses that are going to be purchasing those products aren't demanding that all those farmers use something like Pure Sense. So that's a sort. Go ahead.
I'll go first. And this is a more political answer than a data answer, but a large amount of the supply is still owned and controlled by the government. And when they bring an industry in or allow a business to open up, they give an implicit guarantee to that firm that they will have enough water. And everybody forgets about it as soon as the government says it's okay. It's no different than a government pension plan or something. People don't really ask the right questions, and the government isn't managing the resource in a sustainable manner. And so I think this is truly a government-created problem, and the private sector has to be part of the solution. And from just a pure political point of view, I think that the government is the regulator of our industry, and they're the largest owner. And over time, that model has never proven out. You're either the regulator or you're the owner. But when you're both, it's a conflict of interest over time, and that fundamentally is why we have supply problems in most of our communities.
Well, I'll come back at you in that one, and that will say in California, who has more power in Sacramento? And for a long time, the farmers had a lot more power in all those boards that were regulating those water contracts. Hey, the groundwater was subsiding in the Central Valley, and people still demanded the same amount of water with their water contracts and still demanded cheap water. So who has the power? And it's very rare. We saw it in very rare thing in Imperial Valley, where both a Democratic administration and Republican administration said to Imperial Valley, we're shutting off your water unless you start to bring about some efficiencies. That was very rare. And so because usually they have enough power to say, it's our water, we're getting it cheap. So it's an interesting battle. But I think that if more businesses actually said, hey, I'm worried about my supply chain, then you would also get, I think, government moving as well. Government and all those people that are using that water inefficiently. Okay, switching gears a little bit.
Can I just make a comment on that one?
Yes, please, Chris.
I do think that the big businesses are looking at that sort of thing, and I'm guessing that part of their problem is that water footprint can't be measured easily in the same way that a carbon footprint can. With carbon, you've got one atmosphere, all the carbon's going into the same atmosphere, it has the same net effect. With water, the impact on the environment is actually significantly different depending on where the water comes from and whether the water region is stressed, for example. So there's a lot of complications, I think, in measuring the water footprint.
I think
that might just be a part of the challenge.
That is part of the challenge, but I think that it can be done. It's pretty clear. There's several books out on it.
There's lots of room for improvement there, and we're definitely working on that. So providing that information up the supply chain.
No, I want all those innovations. Yeah. I think we all want to see all these innovations being put to work. Another question we've got here: what is the role of a smart grid, a wireless technology in maybe a blue tech? Any response?
I'll give you my experience. I've overseen a lot of utilities in the industry. We've done a lot of the math on meter reading manually versus wireless versus network. And right now, you know, depending on the nature of your utilities, you know, the actual radio read wireless actually makes a lot of sense, okay, which essentially takes you down from a community of maybe 30,000 homes from having, you know, 20 or 30 meter readers running around fighting dogs to one or two trucks driving through the community picking up the reads. The next step, obviously, smart meters. Water is 10 years behind power typically on anything cool, okay? So what you'll find from most water utility guys is they're kind of waiting to see what happens with power, you know. So the more advancement power has, hopefully we can close some of that timing gap. But if power wires up all the homes with meters in it, City of Long Beach, for example, used to subcontract meter reading from the water department to the gas utility and power utility, or I'm sorry, to the electric utility. The electric utility put in all smart meters. The city had to go out and hire like 50 employees, you know, the next day. And so, you know, you see what's going to happen. Somebody's already working on the math. So I think there's a great market there. And really, knowledge is power in water. I mean, if you educate yourself on your water consumption, your bill will drop 25%, almost guaranteed, if you've not really educated yourself. And the more information we get in the consumer hands, the more, you know, opportunity we have for, you know, treating conservation as a new source of water.
Thank you, David. I think one of the issues is that we all take water for granted, just basically. You know, the water comes out of the tap, and we flush, it goes away. And it's just sort of out of sight and out of mind on that, and then otherwise the water just comes in. And it leads into the question here, why are municipal water rates so low when will water rates reflect its scarcity and value? And that's when we have to look at what do we want. I mean, what's happening is a lot of cities are privatizing their water because the elected officials don't want to ask for a rate increase. Because you ask for a rate increase and you get thrown out of office. Unless you engage and educate the public. And that's one of the tough things. So maybe one of you want to answer why water rates are not higher.
So I'm not sure I could answer that question, but I'll just share an insight. I was born and raised in Singapore. And Singapore as an island doesn't have much water, had to buy its water from the neighboring country. And so I actually grew up thinking that, you know, I remember even poster in my head that has a droplet of water and said, water is precious. And so we are actually taught from young to have conservation, and water is actually quite expensive in Singapore. And, you know, not surprisingly today, they are quite advanced in a lot of their water, wastewater treatment, reuse, that kind of thing. And, you know, I think circumstances sometimes put you in the situation. And here, because it's cheap, I think we really, like you said, we waste. Right,
and with Singapore, they had a little bit of history with World War II. One of the things that happened is that most of the water is imported from the mainland, from Malaysia. And what happened during World War II, the Japanese blew up the water pipeline. So for in Singapore, that's something been seared in their history, and they do have wonderful water reuse. As we're starting to wind down here, and one of the questions I want to get to, what areas of the water industry are ripe for a startup? If you were going to start another water startup tomorrow, not to put any of you on the spot here, what area would you be in?
I'll go first. The space I like is lower energy use in water reuse, and I definitely will go for industrial market. I think David, you know, explained very well why municipal market is a much harder play. I would go for, you know, unfortunately, I think, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on where you sit, but, you know, the thing about water market is you see very big numbers. I think, you know, it's like 10 billion here, 10 billion there. And then you carve it down eventually on the solution you can actually do based on the funding you have. And that's not a very big market. But I would say go for targeted solution. And I think those are the areas that I'm most excited about.
Yeah, I will tell you, I think it's a very good answer. I will tell you, though, that as someone who's run a large municipal utility, and has looked at a lot of the utilities throughout the U.S. Remember, the Clean Water Act, as David mentioned, was put in place 40 years ago. The Safe Drinking Water Act was also 40 years ago. It was during the Nixon administration. And all that infrastructure was put in place in the late 70s, early 80s, is aging and is being overwhelmed by increasing population. The municipal area, in urban users are way overdue for upgrading or retrofit of their systems. And so I hear what you're saying about waiting on the capital, but there's I know in running utility, there's ways to do it without getting into a lot of bond financing. And
I'll answer that one. So,
go ahead.
I looked at a bunch of water deals for a couple of years. And one of the most interesting ones was a company called Purelytics. I'm not sure how they're doing right now. We didn't invest in them, but one of the things that they were doing that was very interesting to me was that they had a little kind of bag with some material in it that was photoactive, and they were able to break down pollutants in the water. So this could be something that the Marines could use in a emergency situation, or it could be something that is used in the third world by a village. And so those kind of village applications in third world situations where you've got something that's very low cost and very effective at breaking down pollutants in water, and that would be something that I would be very excited about because you've got about 1 billion people in the world who don't have clean water today. They're drinking dirty water and they're getting sick. And that's partly because there isn't enough water, but it's just conditions of life in the third world are such that we need those technologies. So that would be where I would.
Yes, thousands of children die every day from water source, water illness, waterborne illness. So very good point. Someone's directed a question to me. It said, how can water efficiency make more economic sense for utilities when fixed costs are so high? Actually, what you do is and I've been involved in setting rates, and that is you make sure that your the base rates are set to cover all your ongoing O&M, and start to build into that rate increases, have them fit already rate increases in place, so that as you anticipate retrofits or upgrades, that's already built into the rate base. I took over a utility after a 9-year rate freeze, and we were able to get the house financially in order. So there's ways to do it. So it shouldn't be a reason to hold back on efficiency in trying to get enough money to cover your O&M. That shouldn't be a reason to break away from that. Any other points that you all would like to raise? I mean, I've got a few other questions here, but I want to give you all a chance to.
Well, on the topic of areas where I think there's exciting opportunities, I think water reuse is definitely a good one. It's one of the fastest growing segments of the entire water industry, and I think that some of the areas that we're seeing is once you actually decide to reuse water or wastewater, and you recover that water for potable uses or process uses, there's all kinds of other things that you've now recovered. And I think there's a lot of creative technologies coming out of the woodwork for how you then extract and recover the minerals, the fertilizers, the potassium, the nitrogen, all kinds of valuable materials from all the other stuff. And right now, I think the technologies that are being used commercially are they've been around for a long time. So I think there's an area there where at least I'm seeing a lot of innovative ideas for recovering valuable byproducts.
Okay, this is a question that David and I started to get into, started to answer a little bit, but I don't know if any of the others want to weigh in. And say, in California, a big chunk, this is a question, in California, a big chunk of the problem is policy, not technology. To what extent is policy the biggest obstacle in other areas of water space? Anybody? Or is that a given?
Well, I'll just make one comment. There's some observations in water that kind of go unnoticed. In California, there are 4, and I may have the number off a little bit, and your book may. I'll go to her book for the real numbers. But there's 4 times the number of municipal water districts as there are cities. And most cities own some portion of their water or wastewater infrastructure. So think of all the cities you know in California, and roughly 5 times that is the actual number of districts. Each district has its own rate base. They calculate how much water should cost on their own. There's a political process involved. It's remarkably and unnecessarily complex. And there's no question that if you ever want to get to the ultimate goal, we have to address, you know, this structural problem with government, which I'm not sure that's policy, but it is truly a structural issue in there.
No, and I agree with you, David. Everyone has a different system set up. In fact, I wonder if all of you know who runs your water system. Most people don't. And yet it's something you depend on 24/7. You know who your cell phone provider is. You may not know who. How do people get in charge of your water system? Are they elected? Are they appointed? Do they have any background in water? Do they have any aptitude for the financial or the management side of it? Those are questions you should all know about your water utility. People you're relying on 24/7. Just think how upset you get when your cell phone goes out. What happens if your sewer system breaks? Or water doesn't come out of the tap? So with that, I'm going to turn it back to the chair, and we have a lot more questions we could discuss, but I appreciate the panel. Please give them a round of applause.